2, 1, go. Right, well thank you everybody for coming here tonight. I'm glad the weather wasn't like it was this afternoon. Last year, Max, for those who weren't here last year, Max followed the old railway from Pontypool via Usk, via Lord Raglan, via Raglan to Monmouth, and finally to Colford. This time he's going down the Wye Valley. He's starting at Monmouth, into Redbrook, St Bravils,
yes,
Landogo, Tintern, going past Devil's Pulpit and on down to Chepstow. I think that's the route, isn't it?
Yes, you've said it all now.
Yeah. Max is a second-year history student at Cardiff University with great interest and knowledge in trains and railways. So, Max Moebus.
Thank you for having me back again. Glad to see you enjoyed it last time. So, as like I said, today we'll be going down the Wye Valley from Monmouth down towards Chepstow. And so, one of the stations that overlaps with previous talk last year is Monmouth Troy Station. So here we have a picture. The train is actually, though it looks like it's coming, so Pontypool is this direction, and then so we'll be heading. So although it looks like it's coming from Pontypool, this is actually a train that's just come up from Chepstow. So it's arrived into platform 2 on that side, and so it's just coming over to platform 1, ready to make its return trip down to Chepstow. So for Monmouth Troy, it opened well in advance of the Wye Valley line. It was actually part of the Pontypool, Usk and Colford Railway. So Monmouth Troy actually opened in October 1857. So that's almost 20 years before the opening of the Wye Valley line. So Monmouth Troy Station itself, it was the largest on the line that wasn't on a main line such as Chepstow. So it had 2 platforms. It had a sizable goods yard, about 8 sidings. It had its own separate tea room, large tea room, and ticket office, waiting facilities. And so, but the issue with Monmouth Troy is that it was situated quite far out of Old Monmouth town. So unfortunately, never really had the passenger numbers boarding the trains there. They almost used it as like the terminus, so when you wanted to change trains. Unfortunately, when the line closed in 1959 to passengers, Monmouth Troy didn't really, well, its life continued until 1964 as a freight depot. Because of its remote location away from Monmouth, it was able to continue to serve and marshal the goods that was coming around from Tintern, from Lynbrook, from Pontypool direction. But yes, and so unfortunately this is the state of poor Monmouth Troy today. So this picture was taken, well, just last week. So this is the same tunnel portal as you can see here. So there we go. So in relation, I'm probably stood about there taking the picture. So as you can see, Monmouth Troy very overgrown now, unfortunately, although there are still some traces of it around. So you can still make out some of the platform edges. Obviously the tunnel portal is still there, and well, you've got to go looking for it. You can still find platform edges. It's just very much overgrown. But as I said, here is a nice picture of Monmouth Troy's goods yards. You can see here, Great Western Pannier Tank is shunting some of the wagons around. So this is taken in '63. So the line had already been closed to passengers for 4 years at this point, so it's predominantly just a freight railway that the line is being used for local businesses, for agriculture, and also just as storage. Large portions of the line were used to store old railway steam locomotives that were still relatively new, but they weren't required at that moment. They were almost in reserve. But here we go. Here's a picture of the goods yard today. So as you can see, it's overgrown. This is the back wall of the goods yard here. So the station would have been up here, and then the platforms, etc. So as you can see, it's still there, but not well, noticeable as it was. I should also say, as I said in lecture last year, Monmouth Troy has been preserved. It is now Whitcomb Station on the Gloucester and Warwickshire Railway. They dismantled Monmouth Troy in the 70s, early 80s, brick by brick, and rebuilt it as a complete replica in Whitcomb on the Gloucester and Warwickshire Railway. So if you want to see it, I believe someone said that there is actually a blue plaque on the station that says where it originally came from. Well worth a visit. But also for Monmouth Troy we have the signal box. So I have been corrected or given additional information by a gentleman on Facebook called Ray Viney. Not Ray Viney, sorry. I can't recall his name at the moment, but he's very into his signal boxes, and so he's very kindly helped me with the information. And so he's told me that Monmouth Troy signal box, it was a Great Western Type 7D box. So, for you railway enthusiasts,
You know exactly what that is.
yes, I hope you know. Well, apparently it's something to do with the windows, the number of panes to windows. That's what I've been told. But I leave that for that sort of enthusiast. But no. So Monmouth Troy signal box, it had 38 levers. It was opened in 1873. So it was opened not when the Wye Valley line opened and not when the line to Ross on Wye opened, but it came shortly before those two lines joined with Monmouth Troy, making it a junction station. So they saw the need for the signal box, and so it was built to serve the potential need, which materialised. It served the lines down to Chepstow, up to Ross on Wye, over to Pontypool, and so well, there was a signalman here 24 hours a day, serving the trains, both goods and passengers. Yes, it was eventually, though, when the passengers finished in January 1959, signal box became somewhat superfluous. It's a case of that a lot of what could be done without the need for a signalman there continuously. Cost savings, essentially. So it was downgraded to a ground frame, which means that it wasn't manned. You'd have a shunter would come up on the train from Chepstow with the keys to the signal box, and then would operate the signal box, then lock it all up and leave it at the end of the day. So it was a bit of a sorry end for it, but unfortunately Monmouth Troy signal box was not preserved when Gloucester and Warwickshire bought Monmouth Troy. And for those of you that remember last year, I understand that it was caused some amusement that I brought a brick with me. Well, today I brought two. So may I present you with a relic of Monmouth Troy signal box. On a recent walk, they have recently cleared the site, as you can see here. So this was the foundations of Monmouth Troy signal box. You can just make out, do a Tony Robinson here. You can just see the Roman walls by here. But the brick was found roughly in the middle there. There was originally, in the last few years, there'd been a gas station by there. However, that has unfortunately sprung a leak. And so in the repair work for that, they've cleared the site. And so whilst walking the site last week, I found this relic of Monmouth Troy, and it is a Newport Star brickworks. So unfortunately not a local one from New Inn, but still within the area. But however, something that does still stand is Chippenham Meadow Viaduct, also known as the Monmouth Stone Arch Viaduct. So pictures of it as it was operational are very rare. This is from this book here, The Wye Valley Railway and Colford Branch by B.M. Handley. Very good book. I've spoken to Brian on multiple occasions, and he's very kindly given me permission to use some of the photographs in his book. So here you can see the stone viaduct here and the lattice section, which is unfortunately now missing. So it was a 20-arch red sandstone viaduct, so it was mined from out towards Lynbrook Way. Apologies in advance of my pronunciation. I do know that there are some local changes to how you pronounce them, but so out towards Limbrook and Cone Bridge. It was brought in, and so it was 183 metres or 600 feet in total length, the stonework, with two 23 metre or 75 foot steel lattice girders, so steel lattice by there, and you can see the other bridge abutment there carrying the line on, and was inaugurated, so the construction began in 1861 and it opened just 3 years later in 1864. It was part of a daring plan to try and create Monmouth as like a new industrial capital in Monmouthshire. However, that plan quickly fell through with a financial crisis in 1866, which saw the end to what was at the time being called railway mania, which has seen thousands of miles of track laid across the UK. Unfortunately, many are seeing the potential to make money out of this. Many investors sunk money into railway companies that never materialised, which made them ultimately very hesitant and postponed the construction of the Wye Valley line for 12 years due to the financial crisis. But the viaduct was actually built by Kenners of Crumlin, who would later go on to construct the Crumlin Viaduct as well, which is another nice local link. So here is a picture of Chippenham Meadow Viaduct. Now, again, this is taken just the other week. It is unfortunately in a very sorry state. As you can see, it is surrounded on all sides by steel fencing. That's due to the crumbling masonry of it, unfortunately. The future of it is uncertain. Speaking to some locals, they said that it was purchased a few years ago by a Hungarian director who wanted to convert it into a caravan park. He wanted to put caravans across the top, but health and safety, for whatever reason, didn't think that would be a good idea. So I don't know who owns the viaduct now. I don't know if it's reverted to council ownership or if it's still under private ownership, but there are calls from people of Monmouth to make sure that this railway bridge is preserved. But it has become home to many species of birds, swallows, sparrows, etc. So whilst this industrial past is very much long gone now, as they say, nature does always fight back. But so we'll go over the bridge now to Wysham Halt. Now Wysham Halt is a request stop, so it's not a permanent station. Those of you who remember last year, the halts were constructed by the Great Western Railway in the 20s and 30s to try and boost passenger numbers. So as you can see, it's a very simple design, just simple timber platform with a small corrugated iron hut on the top, which would go on to be used for like Anderson shelters during the war. But it was cheap, it was cost effective to build these halts in places that you couldn't necessarily build a full station, or you wouldn't expect vast passenger numbers like you would say in Usk. So they were a stopgap method to try and boost passenger numbers. So it opened on the 12th of January 1931, and I believe it was the fourth halt to be constructed on the line. So we have 5 permanent stations and 5 halts across the length of the line, as well as many bridges and two tunnels. I can't recall off the top of my head how many bridges, but yes, unfortunately Wysham closed with the end of passenger services in January 1959. But this Wysham Halt was originally planned to be a station, and that's part of the plan to turn Monmouth into an industrial hub. So they'd originally planned to build another junction station here in Wysham, which would have then come down the old tram route to link up with Monmouth Mayhill, essentially creating a giant railway triangle over Wye. And it was hoped that the coal and iron from the Forest of Dean would be coming down here, and then they could send it straight up to Hereford. But unfortunately, the coal and iron traffic never materialised, and with the financial crisis in 1866. It never happened. So Wysham Halt just remained a simple wooden construction. But yes, so we'll go a bit further down the line now to Redbrook Station. So Redbrook Station is the first station built by the Wye Valley Railway Company. So Monmouth Troy was an existing station, so this was their first station built. So they extended the line gradually down from Monmouth Troy, as well as building up from Tydenham. So Redbrook Station is a very simple station in comparison to Monmouth Troy. It's just got a singular platform. We have a small signal box on the end of the platform here, and then the tracks you can see leading off, that is for a very small goods yard. They didn't have a good shed, unfortunately, just a crane, but Redbrook was built for the tin plate works, and I believe there was also a copper foundry originally on the opposite side of the Wye, so it was built to serve that industry. So unlike the line from Pontypool to Monmouth, which was built on the hope of industry, the Wye Valley was built with industry already in place. However, when the Wye Valley opened in Redbrook, the tin plate works had closed 2 years prior. So unfortunately it missed out just by a hair, but later on it did, the tin plate works did return, and so the tin plate continued right the way up until the 60s, when eventually in 64 the line was closed completely as part of the beaching cuts and the lines were lifted, and that also then spelled the end for the Redbrook tin plate works. So here we have another view of Redbrook Station. Redbrook Station, very well known on the Wye Valley because of its station master and his love of climbing roses. It's not too clear on the picture here, but there are accounts of some brilliant roses growing up all over the station building, climbing roses, etc. And Redbrook was always in fierce competition with Simmons Yacht for, well, pride of the line, I believe was the term that they used. So it was a competition held on the Wye Valley lines to find out which was the best station, which was the prettiest, which was the most well maintained, and so it was always a fierce competition between Redbrook and Simmons Yacht for that prize. But yeah, so unfortunately Redbrook, it closed to passengers in the 59, but really by 1960 Redbrook was just well, a waiting area for the shunters, so they used to just sit inside the station. It didn't really serve much goods traffic, mainly just the little bits coming out of the tin plate works. But yeah, so what makes Redbrook most well known though is Penalt Viaduct, or Redbrook Viaduct, depending on which side of the Wye you're standing. But Penalt Viaduct, it's the first crossing, it's the second crossing of the River Wye. It was built on massive cast iron piers. It was approximately, what did it say, 72 metres or 82 yards in total length. So quite a short viaduct, but it across the Wye at a skew rather than parallel to it, such as in, perpendicular to it in Monmouth. But originally, they had a great deal of trouble with trespassers on the line, walking down the tracks to get to the opposite side for the boat in. And so in the 50s, they decided that they were going to construct this pedestrian access down the side here to try and reduce the issues of people trying to take on the train, both sober and slightly tipsy, because, well, yes.
My mother used to take a pushchair across there, or tram.
Oh, yes.
She lived in Penalt, and the shop and their shop was across the bridge. So
Yes.
she would push the pushchair.
Oh, there we go.
On the railway, like that, the footbridge was built in 1955, 56, I think.
Yes, 1954 the plan went through, 1955 it was built, yes.
So you were the baby trespassing on the
Yes, maybe, there we go. Resting up. But Redbrook, or Penalt Viaduct, does survive today, although in a very sorry state for how it is at the moment. There is great upheaval from the locals over its state, and I believe a few years ago they raised £900,000 to try and preserve the viaduct, which went into preserving initially the pedestrian access over to the opposite side of the Wye. But yeah, unfortunately, the bridge didn't see a lot of traffic in the latter years, and so, well, you can still see the remainder of the original wooden. So the tracks would have sat on these larger wooden beams here, with these smaller ones where people were trespassing as they walked over the rails. But it is in a very sad state, but still very much. Well, it was given a Grade 2 listing status in England in September 1984, and then in Wales in February 2001. And Wales gave it Grade 2 listing status because of its placement within the Wye and how it enhanced the beauty, I believe was the words that they, along the line that they used. But so we travel over the viaduct to Penalt Halt, perhaps, well, the most successful of all the halts and popular because it was built specifically to serve the boat in. So it was a nice pub halt, as it were. And so here we can see the most important train of the day, the beer being delivered. And so we have, we have this gentleman here in the black hat. That is the guard called Ted Chandler, and the gentleman in the white shirt next to him is Arthur Morgan. So Arthur Morgan was the porter at Redbrook Station. So this is taken in 1960. Well, by this point, Penalt Halt had actually been decommissioned. So it wasn't actually supposed to have any traffic stopping there whatsoever, but beer takes priority. And so here we can see a very, very small goods train stopping by, just simply a locomotive, one wagon and a guard's van, just to deliver the beer. And so they used to just roll the beer down off the end of the platform, and then someone would be stood at the bottom of the hill to catch it, and hopefully it didn't roll into the Wye. But no, so it was, Penalt was the penultimate halt to be built on the line. It opened in August 1931, and it was situated a staggering 220 yards from Redbrook Station. So it was built purely just to stop people trespassing along the line until they built the footbridge in the 50s. So it was a halt of necessity, as it was. But yeah, so as I said, perhaps one of the most successful of them. So moving further on now, we get down to Whitebrook Halt. Now, Whitebrook was the first of the halts to be built on the line, and unfortunately, quite a lot of the halts on the line, they are still in very remote locations, and because of them being halts, there isn't a lot of history. So for Whitebrook Halt, all we really know is that it opened in February 1927 and then closed in the January of 59. So a very short service life. But for Whitebrook, the construction of the railway came too late. Whitebrook had 3 paper mills at the time, well, just 10 years prior to the construction of the line, but by the time the line came, they'd unfortunately all gone, failing to monopolise on the paper trade. And so for Whitebrook, it was left just as a simple halt status, rather than being able to construct one of these larger stations to serve the paperwork. So fortunately for Whitebrook, it was one of those things that the line came just that little bit too late. So we move on from Whitebrook to the station which I would say probably had the biggest identity crisis of all of them. So we have Dixford Station, St Bravils and Llandogo, and then finally St Bravils Station. So renamed 3 times in the course of its life, trying desperately to find a location that was within its area. So originally named Big Swear Station after the bridge, they then later called it St Bravils and Llandogo to try and serve the 2 areas, but St Bravils was 2 miles away and Llandogo was a further mile down the track. So it was this very isolated station, again, simple Wye Valley construction of a single platform, single box. We have a goods yard off to the side here, waiting room, ticket office. But it was very remote, and so passenger numbers were always very low. And so when the line closed in 1959, the station closed the following year in 1960 completely. It didn't stay open to goods traffic until 64 because there was no goods for the station to serve. The signal box was reduced in status in 1928 down to ground frame, aimed just simply to serve the goods yard, as they simplified the token working, so the staff that would be handed to the driver and then returned to the signal box. So that was simplified from Monmouth to Redbrook, to, simplified to Monmouth to St Bravils, and then finally Monmouth to Tintern. So St Bravils, unfortunately, became a very overlooked station on the line. But here we can see one of, well, I believe this is the final day of operations in 1959. So we can still see the goods yard is predominantly used for storage, some older wagons off to the side, and here is the final passenger service being hauled up towards Monmouth. The final day wasn't the typical train working, so this is actually some ordinary Great Western suburban stock, as opposed to what was common on the Wye Valley, which was the Great Western auto coaches, which essentially allowed the driver to operate the train from a small cab within the front end of the carriages, whilst the firemen shovelled furiously at the rear. But no, due to the economics of it all, these were just simply two carriages that were lying around in the yard for the last day, because the auto coaches had been moved on up towards Glenavon to serve the remaining lines up there. So I don't think there's anything else for poor St Bravils. Again, with the signal box, Reggie Instone, that's the gentleman's name. He's informed me that it's a Mackenzie and Holland of Worcester Type 3 design signal box. Again, for anyone that's interested in that, it's all the signal boxes on the Wye Valley line were identical. So Redbrook, St Bravils, Tintern, Tydenham and Wye Valley Junction, they were all the exact same construction, all supplied by Mackenzie. And they were gradually modernised and adapted over the years. So for St Bravils, it was modernised in 1908, and it was reduced to a 15 lever frame from 25, and the lever frame itself was actually second hand from Brentford. So again, it shows that the line wasn't financially affluent, so it never had new from the onset. It was always second hand. But eventually, though, it was reduced down to just simply 2 levers by the end, just simply to use the level crossing, which was the only level crossing on the line. Everywhere else on the line was via bridge. But the crossing gates were removed in 1960 when the station closed, and it went over to flag workings. So the train would come down as far as the end of the level crossing. The guard would then jump down out of the train and stand on the level crossing with a red flag and call the train across. So it was a slower but more cost-effective method of making safe the crossing, as it were. But yes, and so now we move on to Llandogo Halt. Now Llandogo Halt was the second halt to be constructed on the line and opened officially in March 1927. It's situated so the woods are just behind the camera here, at the south end of the village, but it was built purely to reduce the walk that the passengers had. So because it was built on the south side of the village, it meant that the passengers didn't have to walk the mile to St Bravils station. So St Bravils was renamed St Bravils when Llandogo Halt was opened. But again, Llandogo Halt, it was still situated quite far away from the village, so didn't really see much passenger use. But you can see quite clearly here the simple design of the platforms with the gas. Well, actually, Llandogo was one of the few halts to be modernised to electric lighting in the the mid-50s, so not long before closure. We have an electric light here, but that replaced, I don't know, unfortunately the bracket's been taken off by this point in 1958. But originally they just had simple hurricane lamps hanging off of the station boards. And so the guard would come round on the first train of the day and would light every single one of the lamps, and then on the last train would extinguish them as they returned back to Chepstow. But it just highlights how simple the halts were, but still how remote, well, you can see quite clearly here, how remote the halt is in comparison to civilization. But another rather remote halt is here. We have Brockware Halt. This is built, well, the picture is actually taken from the bridge up to Brockware. So it was built within the cutting. It was the third halt to be opened in August 1929, and again followed suit closure in January 1959. It was, however, this one was more conveniently placed because there was a bus stop just at the end of this path here, which meant that well, it was more used by people coming to the area rather than locals, so they could catch the train up as far as here. And then I've been told by a gentleman that the bus was the Bristol Tramway Service 102, which went from Monmouth to Redbrook, Colford, Hughesfield, Tintern and Chepstow. So it shows the beginning of like the merger between railway and bus travel. Eventually the buses would go on to become red and white buses, which was based in Lydney. So, but it shows for here it shows the merger between them, whereas in many other places it showed the competition starting to form between railways and the bus services. For here, the railways couldn't serve the populations. They were neither too high up hills or too far down in the valley, so the buses picked up where the railways just couldn't access. So, but not situated too far away, we have the largest intermediate station on the line, which was Tintern. Now Tintern, as I'm sure many of you know, has been preserved today. Wonderful cafe and walk. The platforms have now been filled in, but there is a museum there with many lovely pieces of history still visible there, including one of the railway staffs that took the trains from Monmouth down to Tintern. So Tintern was built in, my pages are stuck together. Tintern was opened in 1876 with the line, but it was originally called Tintern for Brockware. But again, as we saw with St Bravils, it was simplified just down to Tintern when they opened St Bravils station. But Tintern, again, is very remote, as I'm sure many of you know, it's very remote from Tintern village itself. So it was built under the pretense of that it would serve the abbey, so you'd have many holiday makers coming to the area to see the abbey, especially for the summer solstice. But that unfortunately never happened because of how remote the station was from the area. Originally, the line was actually supposed to travel up the Welsh side of the valley. However, it was deemed unviable because of how close the line would have to be built onto the side of the Wye, and so it was deemed uneconomical, which is why it then at Tintern goes over the Wye, and then we go down towards the Tydenham. But Tintern station, it actually had 3 platforms, making it larger than Monmouth Troy. But as you can see here, we had an island platform in the middle here. It also had the largest of the goods yards. The weighbridge for the station is still there, although it's now called Plate Layers Cabin. But it was, well, a bit like Monmouth Troy became. Tintern was where the freight on the line was marshalled before being sent up to Monmouth or down towards Chepstow. So it saw significant freight traffic, but predominantly it remained a purely passenger station. And so here we can see a passenger train on its way down to Chepstow with driver, fireman and guard smiling nicely for the camera here. But unfortunately for the steam engines, there was an attempted takeover by the dreaded diesels in 1941. So this is a Great Western diesel rail car more affectionately known by enthusiasts as a flying banana. Although it doesn't quite look right for this one, this is a Art Deco style railcar, whereas its predecessor had, this had razor blade edges, whereas its predecessor had curved edges, which did give it a banana-esque silhouette, hence its affectionate name. So the Great Western tried these in 1941 during the war as coal shortages kicked in and other economic constraints. However, ultimately, oil at that time was still far more expensive than coal was. And so the trial only lasted about 3 or 4 years before the steam engines returned back to the line, and the railcar travelled over towards Gloucester, serving the Gloucester lines more than it would end up on the Wye Valley lines. So here we have another nice picture of Tintern here. So you can see Tintern signal box, again another Mackenzie signal box, following the same suit, 25 levers. Tintern retained its 25 levers for its entire lifespan. So here we can see 1960, so passengers have gone, and you can see how quickly shrubbery has started to go. The bushes aren't being as maintained as they were before because they have no motive now. There's no Wye Valley, there's no pride of the Wye for the station masters. So Tintern, it begins a very slow descent into how it ends up in the 70s, which is very dilapidated, but is fortunately purchased by the council, I think in 1980, around that time, for £1,500, and they have refurbished it. I can say that I have a personal link to this because my great uncle, he was a carpenter, and he was the gentleman that rebuilt the steps to the signal box as part of the restoration by the council. So, but here we have another picture, quite grainy, but it does show here. This picture is taken in 1929 and shows the Tintern for Brockwere sign. So it shows, it gives you a little bit of the history, that because so many of the pictures we see are from when camera and photography became cheaper in the 50s. So some of these older shots are rarer, but here we can see another picture of the signal box here, and then here is the signal box today. So this is now actually a wedding venue. So you can get married in Tintern signal box. Oh, how times have changed. So yes, and so we now leave Tintern. Again, a very grainy image. Unfortunately, we don't know the date for this, but trust me, there is a tunnel somewhere in that black blob up here, and so we have a train heading down towards Chepstow. But we also have a Great Western, or British Railways Western Region camping coach. So the camping coaches were introduced to Tintern, as well as you had other stations such as Kern Bridge. They were introduced as just simple holiday homes to try and boost visitors to the area. And so for the signal box, for the camping coach, it was introduced by the Great Western Railway between 1935 and 1939, and then was removed, and then was later brought back by Western Region and the British Railways from 1956 to 1962. So it was, from what I've heard, phenomenally popular. It was always very well received and always had good bookings. And here you can see some of the holidaymakers. Some even stood on the roof of the carriage waving to the passing train. Clearly no sign of health and safety. A far funner time all round, I'm sure. So here we have, this is the opposite end of Tintern Tunnel. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information on Tintern Tunnel because it's very much overshadowed by its partner of Tidenham Tunnel. But again, a nice view down through the tunnel. This is hoped to become part of the Wye Valley Greenway at some point, although they have yet to receive permission to rebuild the bridge connecting Tintern Station and the tunnel. So at the moment, it has become part of the bat sanctuary in the area. But yes, So now we move on to the Wireworks branch, Tintern Wireworks branch. Now this is the first part of the Wye Valley Railway to actually be built. However, it is also the bit that doomed it even from day one. So it connects the Tintern Abbey Wireworks, which was owned by our friend Lord Raglan, and the Abbey Works had dated all the way back from 1568 and was the first wireworks to be built and operated in Britain. And just 30 years later, in 1597, there were over 5,000 workers employed all across the UK using wire produced from Tintern Abbey. So it was a very affluent business back in the 1500s. However, by the time of the railways in the 1800s, early 1900s, whilst wire was still very much in demand, more modern processes had come in, and so it made the Abbey Mill Wireworks superfluous and redundant. But at the time when the line opened, there were 5 wireworks mills. But the day that the railway opened in 1876, all 5 mills closed. So the day it opened, all 5 mills closed, and they converted then over the next year to tin plate work. So that saw a bit of work, but unfortunately, because of how much tin plate works there, how many tin plate works there wasn't the demand that had originally been hoped for by Lord Raglan through the wire mills. But the main issue, though, for the Wye Valley Railway was that the demands placed on them by Lord Raglan. It was stipulated in the Wye Valley Amendment Act of 1875 that the Wye Valley Railway had to construct the bridge of its own costings and then pay for its upkeep, and they weren't allowed to charge for the transport of goods over the railway initially. However, that was later changed, and they did install a small weighing bridge which allowed some form of economic return for the construction of the line, because otherwise it would have spelled the end of the Wye Valley Railway line from even before day one. But in 2021, I believe, 2021, the National Lottery awarded funding for the restoration of the Wireworks Bridge, and restoration in 2021, and it was eventually reopened by I'm sure many of you have seen Derek Walking Weatherman in May 2023, and so it is been remarkably well restored. I've walked over it several times now, and has now become part of the Wye Valley Greenway, which links Tintern all the way down to Tutchill Primary School. Well worth a walk. So it was. There's not really much else to say on it. Unfortunately, it was the doom of the railway, but also predominantly the reason why Lord Raglan approved the construction of the railway initially. But so we move on now to what was perhaps the Wye Valley's most successful industry, which was the quarries. So the Wye Valley had 2 quarries. We had one here in Tintern, and then one down towards Tideham Dayhouse Quarry. So quarry traffic for Tintern is a bit of a grey area as to when it begins. Some records state that the quarry work started with the opening of the railway in 1876. Others suggest that it came much later in 1931. Unfortunately, I've not been able to verify that specifically, but here we can see the evolution between. So this photograph is taken in the 1930s, 1940s, with a Great Western pannier tank transporting the stone via steam. And then here we have a picture from Brian Handley's book, which shows a Class 37 and the height of British Railways motive power in the 70s doing the same job. So it's for Tintern Quarry, that is what preserved most of the line, whilst the rest of the line north of Tintern closed in 64. The line to Tintern Quarry remained open until 1981, and then that was finally when Tintern Quarry closed. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information on the quarry itself. It's not really known what the site is used for. There's a lot of rock climbers use the site now, but it hasn't been designated an official new use. It's more of a nature area now rather than anything else. But so we move now on to Tydenham Tunnel, or Tiddenham Tunnel. Originally built as 2 tunnels, as you might be able to just see here. There's a small gap between the 2 tunnels, and that's how they built it in 1876. And they built the main tunnel, which is 1,120 yards, which is about 1,000 metres in length. They dug that by sinking a singular shaft in the middle and digging in both directions simultaneously, which allowed them to average about 2 yards per day in mining, which the company at the time deemed beyond all expectations. So it took 20 months to dig the tunnel, and it was through limestone, very difficult, and unfortunately there were 2 fatalities in the construction. One was through a case of dynamite going off, where unfortunately the victim was burnt, and the other one was due to a rock fall. However, in terms of navvy casualties, it remains one of the lowest in the area for railway constructions. But as I said, it opened in 1876 with the line. However, somewhere between 1900 and 1919, the gap between the 2 tunnels was filled in right the way up to here. We don't know why. There has been suspected that it was due to taxation. It's a case of that you pay more taxes on the number of tunnels, so by creating one long tunnel you save the tax. However, I've not been able to prove that as of this date, unfortunately. Tydenham Tunnel is still accessible. It's now part of the Wye Valley Greenway. It's accessible during the spring and summer months. However, during the winter it is unfortunately closed, as it's now part of a bat sanctuary for fruit bats, I believe. And so here we actually have a picture inside Tydenham Tunnel. So it's actually built on a curve as well, and on quite a steep gradient. And speaking to a former fireman, they said that due to the gradient, what you would do is, as you were coming up to the tunnel, is that you would fire a load of coal, and then they would actually lie down on the floor, on the cab floor, because of the fact that so much smoke was built up with the gradient. It wouldn't carry the smoke flat, so the smoke kept coming back down, so they'd have to lie down so as to not suffocate, which is something you don't really think about out for the steam era. Is for the diesels, they just charge straight through, but for the steam engines, the crews were still very exposed to the elements. But here we've got a picture around 2010, shortly before they lifted the tracks, which were still in place, up until quite recently, actually. I think about 2019 the tracks were still in place before they started conversion over to the Wye Valley Greenway. But
actually, how long is that tunnel? Just approximately.
I think the total tunnel length is just shy of what would it be, 1,200 yards, I believe, in total length.
Long.
I think it's one of the largest in the area.
It's the longest preserved tunnel in the country.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was something like that. Yes.
1,009 metres.
Yes. Yeah. There we go. Yes. Yes. I was just trying to think. I think before the Severn railway tunnel was dug, I think it held the record in the area for the longest tunnel at that time, but obviously then beaten by the Severn railway tunnel. But directly out of the tunnel, so behind there, behind the steam, we have Netherhope Halt. Now this is the last of the halts to be constructed on the line, and you have the road bridge, which you can actually see here. So here is actually where the halt is constructed. It's to give you a good reference, but it was accessed by a very steep set of stairs. There was a local population, but nothing really significant. So it was constructed, and as we can see, it was used, but not significantly. It opened in on the 16th of May 1932, but then only 27 years later closed in the January. It was all the can't get the words out. The station board and the pagoda, not pagoda, the halt building were actually the first items on the line to be removed in the January. They were immediately removed. We don't know why they were so quickly removed, but by February, the halt had been cleared, and it was just simply left as a grass platform, which we can see here. The nice Western Region High Mech, and so here is the remainder of the platform, hauling the High Mech hauling the quarry train down from Tinton Station. So this is 1971, and I put it in because so many of the pictures we look at are black and white, so I thought I'd add in a bit of colour at this point. So we now move on to the last of the Wye Valley stations. Now, Tydenham Station didn't follow the same design as any of the other stations. It's got quite a unique design in that it's got almost an L-shaped stone building with a large wooden seat, canopy seating area. It was, again, a very remote station, but it was also the smallest in regards to its goods yard as well, which you can see here as just a single stretch of track here. The station was actually so isolated that during World War I it closed. From January 1917 until February 1918, the station was closed because due to manpower shortages, the station master and his two porters were moved on to other stations, and I believe one of the boy porters was actually conscripted into the forces and later came back to become the station master of Tydenham Station. But one of the other things about Tydenham is that with its remote location, there are very few photographs of it, and so as a result, I've spoken to many people, and we've not actually been able to place where the signal box at Tydenham was actually constructed. Some believe it was built at the end of the platform here, some believe it was further up the cutting, and some question as to whether it actually had a signal box altogether. But it's believed it followed the same design as the other signal boxes, another Mackenzie, but we have yet to find a single photograph or ordnance survey map that places a signal box at Tydenham after its construction. But unfortunately for Tydenham, its days were numbered. When the line closed in 1959, it would only be the station itself would only last until the following year, until it was demolished, as we can see here, and it actually became the loading stage for Dayhouse Quarry. And so, as you can see here, they just piled up the stone on the platforms and just simply loaded the wagons via JCB diggers. Nothing fancy with overhead gantries or hoppers, just simple brute force. As also here you can see another Class 37 heading into Tydenham, ready to. So whilst the wagons were loaded, the diesel engine would come off, run down the old goods platform, and then couple up onto the other end, and that would then take the stone down to Newport, and then later on then down to Chepstow, and then on to Newport. So here we have a picture of Tydenham Quarry. Tydenham, or Dayhouse Quarry, as it was known, was operated by ST Thomas Limited, based in Lydney. We don't again, because of it being a quarry, we don't actually have an exact start date for when they start. When the first quarry in Tydenham started. However, Dale House Quarry lasted until 1991, with the final train mining stopped in 1991 with the final train shipment, removing the last of the quarried stone in 1992, which then completely closed the Wye Valley line. So from 1876 to 1991, Tydenham, although being the most remote station, had remained in continuous use for that time. But oh yes, another thing to note is that the quarry was flooded 5 years later in 1996 and became a diving centre between 2003 and 2022. And that there are now plans as of 2024 for it to be a marine engineering facility to look at the potential of life on other planets through creating underwater pods. So a nice bit of advanced engineering for an old quarry. And so now we head back onto the main line now, just north of Chepstow at Wye Valley Junction. This is one of perhaps my favourite photographs, because here you can actually see the driver exchanging the token to the signalman, and you have a lovely view of the signal box there. Unfortunately, that image is almost impossible to try and capture today, because there's actually just a little bit further down there, there's actually a tunnel now due to new road layouts and everything. Rather than keeping the track as a cutting, they simply put a giant slab of concrete over the top. So the area looks totally different today than it does in this photograph. But Wye Valley Junction, it was built in 1875, so it opened a year in advance of the Wye Valley line, and it allowed the transport of rails and other materials in its construction. And it would actually remain in use until 1969, when the modernisation of the South Wales main line came into force, and that introduced new colour light signals, which were all controlled from Cardiff, and so it rendered the signal box, unfortunately, superfluous. Yes, and so you can just see the steps, some steps down there, and that is where our next photograph is taken from. So this is Touchhill for Beachley Halt. This was a halt on the main line. It wasn't built by the Wye Valley Railway, it was built by the Great Western Railway, but only served by the Wye Valley lines. None of the mainline trains ever stopped here. It was built in July 1934 as part of the Great Western scheme to improve passenger numbers. And it's often overlooked because of the fact it was on the main line. So many trains just flew straight through, with only the stopping trains of the Wye Valley, which were 6 trains daily, ever stopping there. So it was a forgotten station even during its time. Although used by some locals, it's not as successful as other halts that were constructed on the main line, which went from Chepstow down to Seven Tunnel Junction, but an honourable mention. But here we have perhaps one of the most well-known parts of Chepstow for railway enthusiasts. We have Brunel's Chepstow Railway Bridge, so built by Isambard Kingdom Brunel for the South Wales main line in 1852. It actually was the prototype for the Royal Albert Bridge, and was at the time a feat of engineering, with these large cast iron supports measuring 9 foot in diameter, showing the sheer size of it. For many, it was a question of why did they build the railway so high up in the air? As you can see, the sheer scale of the embankment having to be constructed, and that was due to the Wye Valley. The Wye River is still tidal, and so there was still a significant amount of shipping being done up the Wye as far as Whitebrook, right the way up until the 1930s. But we also have just in the wharfs here is Chepstow Station. You've got the wharfs here, and you had a Royal Naval Dockyard where they actually built the ships, and so it was built within the Royal Naval or the Admiralty standards that it had to have a 40-foot clearance between the high tide and the base of the bridge to allow the Royal Naval vessels to traverse underneath. Unfortunately, I should say, here we have a more...
Could you just put an approximate date on that last picture?
An approximate date, I think that was...
you see a steam ship?
I think that was about 1860, I believe.
Yeah.
I think I have the date somewhere, but I can't remember off the top of my head. This picture is from 1954, and I believe that's actually a royal train travelling over there with Great Western Castle class locomotive. And so you can see the sheer, in relation to the steam engine, you can see the sheer size of the bridge. Unfortunately, it's not there now, as many of you who have been to Chepstow will know. In 1963, the new British Railways deems the bridge unsafe, and so it was unfortunately removed, and a new section which doesn't follow Brunel's design installed, and it removed the 40-foot clearance. So it's a large steel structure that sits underneath the original platform. However, the struts here are actually, from here onwards to Chepstow, still exists, and is now a Grade 2 listed structure. So unfortunately, it's not as striking as it was originally, but a still testament to Brunel's engineering marvel of the early days of the railway.
Are we looking upstream or downstream there?
You are looking
downstream, I think.
Yes, so that's towards the 7.
Okay.
There, yes. Yeah, because that's on that side is Tutshall, and then on that side is Chepstow. So yes, you're looking down towards there. And so now we finally arrive at the final station on the line, which was Chepstow. Now Chepstow was obviously the largest of the stations because it was the main line station. It was built by Brunel and opened in 1852 as part of the South Wales Main Line, and it was typical of Brunel's engineering. It was very, very ornate, very, very highly detailed, with the 2 station buildings being constructed of an Italian-esque design. They were wood and stone construction, local stones from the Wye Valley area. One of the station buildings still exists today, and is now a tea room, whilst unfortunately its counterpart on the opposite platform, so this building here still exists, whilst the one on this platform has unfortunately, I've not been able to find out why, but was unfortunately demolished at some point during the 60s into the 80s, and now there's a simple Transport for Wales bus stop style waiting shelter. But you can see the size of Chepstow here, with you've got the marshalling yards on the banks there, down into the wharfs, which led down into the naval dockyard, which was still active at this time. This picture's taken 1964, so the dockyard is still being used. 2 of the shunters from the dockyard have been preserved. They were due to appear a fortnight ago at the Dean Forest for their steam gala. However, unfortunately, they were withdrawn, but it shows that elements of the line are still preserved, including the railways. As I said, last year we had 2 steam engines from RF Glasgow have been preserved, as well as multiple of the diesel engines. So it shows that there are, even though the line may not still be there, many of the locomotives and rolling stock that travelled across the line have been preserved.
I'll just add one thing to that. You mentioned about quarries.
Yes.
There's another quarry just further down there, within half a mile.
Is there?
On the right. Yeah, there's an old quarry. If you walk up the hill, there's a path that goes up to Bulwark,
Yes.
and there's a quarry there. Just mention it.
Yeah,
It's
no.
right next to the station, really, within half a mile.
Well, the limestone that they mined in the area,
Yeah.
they used that in the actual construction of the track beds. That was used for the ballast that you can see within the tracks, which was why it was used so heavily by the railways, and also why you see the use of dogfish wagons, which was essentially a hopper wagon with 3 hopper chutes underneath that allowed you to drop. Get off the stage, he says. Allows you to drop the ballast down the middle of the tracks or down the sides, depending on how the P-Way teams required it. But here we have Chepstow signal box. Now, obviously, Chepstow signal box was the largest and had 56 levers to control its marshalling yards. Here you can see the goods sheds. Yes. But no, again, Chepstow signal box, it closed with the Wye Valley Junction in 1969 as the modernisation of the signalling took place across the South Wales main line. So unfortunately, it has since been demolished and is now all electric.
Fireworks.
Yeah. Happy 4th of July. Yes, so unfortunately, as I said, but the goods shed is now actually used by Robert Price. They've got a builder's merchant there, so most of the goods yard on this side has now been taken over by Robert Price, as well as many other smaller industrial units, whilst the marshalling yards on the opposite side have now been turned into a housing development, as well as the wharf side for the Royal Naval Dockyards. Also, you can see the station board here. Reason for its very high positioning is that originally you would have had the junction for the Wye Valley line on the station board. Yes, and I think that sums it up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks very much, Max. That was fascinating, and obviously there's a great deal of research has gone into all those notes that he's made. I have a particular interest in that because I spent 20 years in and around the Wye Valley from about 1991 to 2011, and I didn't know half those little stations existed. But anyway, do we have any questions for Max? Perhaps you've said everything, Max. No more for them.
Nice.
It was comprehensive.
So if it turns down to Chepstow, it's on the English side.
Yes.
Of the Wye, and then
Yes,
taken up,
and then
it's
crosses
on-
back over.
it's
Yes.
on the north side, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
British Rail donated the track to the Forest Railway, the Dean Forest Railway.
Yes, they did, as well as the Glasgow branch line. However, I have a friend at Dean Forest who, when it was donated to them, also went to Glasgow, took one look at it and said it can stay in Glasgow because it was deemed uneconomical to reclaim, whereas, unfortunately, the Wye Valley line's rails were still relatively clear and so easily.
Yeah, just before I finished at Tinton, on the other side there was an organisation called Sustrans who were interested in making a cycle track along there. But I don't think that ever came about, did it?
No, I mean, you've got the Wye Valley Greenway now, which is a walking and cycle
Yeah.
path, but that's come around after COVID in 2021.
Yeah.
Obviously, myself, I would much rather see it back as a railway or a heritage line, but unfortunately,
Tourist trip, yes.
it would be, but unfortunately, there are a few local bats that would disagree.
You can walk from Monmouth to Whitebrook as well, along the line, through the woods, north of Redbrook, and then cross over,
Yes.
if you can stay out of the boat,
Yes.
and carry on down to the bridge at Whitebrook.
Yes. I've walked from Monmouth to Redbrook, however, in doing so I got lost and almost fell into the River Wye at one point. So yes, if you do that, be careful. But
You normally have that problem walking back. from
yes.
the boat, don't you?
I wasn't old enough at that point to go in.
Right, any more questions? No? Right, well I think a final thanks for Max, a round of applause for Max.